Hello and welcome to your Access Point to Washington. I'm Sarah Zaman in for Aisha Tanzim.
Out of unacceptable rhetoric from the North Korean government in the last days. So let me be perfectly clear here today. The United States will defend and protect ourselves and our treaty ally, the Republic of Korea. The Foreign Minister and I also think it's important to stay absolutely focused on our shared goal of a peaceful Korean peninsula, free of nuclear weapons.
The war drumbeat started by North Korea last month is getting louder and louder. Statements carried by North's official news agency say the country is in a state of war against South Korea and the United States, and its military will, according to these statements, reduce everything to ashes and flames from the moment the first attack is unleashed. As American warplanes fly over the Korean peninsula in a show of power and solidarity with the South, what can be done diplomatically to calm down the rising tensions? To discuss this, we have in our studio Ambassador Thomas Hubbard, who served as the U.S. Ambassador to the Republic of Korea from 2001 to 2004. Ambassador Hubbard was also the principal negotiator of the 1994 agreed framework aimed at ending North Korea's nuclear weapons program. He's currently the chairman of the Korea Society in New York City. Thank you very much, Ambassador, for joining us, and welcome to the show.
Thank you, Sarah. It's good to be here.
So you have spent a significant amount of time on the Korean peninsula. You have been engaged in negotiations over the years. Looking at what has happened in the last couple of weeks, starting from March 8th, what do you make of this? What do you think North Korea is trying to achieve?
Well, I think this is the highest state of tension we have seen on the Korean peninsula in nearly 2 decades. The North Koreans have made some of the most outrageous threats and outrageous statements we have heard from them in many years.
But this is not the first time that they have made statements like these.
No, it's not the first time.
So what's so special this time?
I think what's special this time is the number and pace of these statements and threats that they have made. And I think another new factor is that we have new leaders all over Northeast Asia, beginning with Kim Jong-un, the new leader of North Korea. We had gotten used to dealing with his father and his grandfather, and they had made similar threats, perhaps with less intensity. But we don't know this new leader very well, and we can't be sure that he understands the international situation well. We have a new president in South Korea. The South Koreans have indicated that they will not tolerate any further provocations with North Korea. We have new governments in Japan and China as well. So it's a period of some change and uncertainty, and the North Koreans are engaged in their worst behavior.
If you look at North Korea from a military standpoint, I mean, you see on TV a pretty massive show of military might. And when you talk to people who have been there, they say that, it's as if they're stuck back in the 1980s. When you look at it from a military standpoint, do you think North Korea would consider taking a risk of going onto South Korean territory, considering that if it does that South Korea will actually be supported by American military might? Do you see a new leader taking a risk like that?
I think the chance of full-scale war is very slim. I think the North Koreans realize that would be suicidal. But the North Koreans have demonstrated a willingness to carry out smaller-scale attacks on South Korean territory. They sank a South Korean naval vessel a couple of years ago, resulting in a number of deaths. So I think we can't rule out provocations. And again, we're not as sure about this new North Korean leader, whether he really knows where the limits are or not.
So when you talk about, that the chances of war are pretty slim, but the chance of doing something small is high. When a leader makes such a big show of, in his statements and in what he's saying to his own people, he's making a big show. Is there a chance that he's actually just trying to impress his own people and the military that he's working with more than him actually trying to have an aggressive posture in front of the rest of the world?
That's probably part of it. I think a lot of this is internally directed. I think he is also, one is tempted to think he's following a pattern in which the North Koreans have often engaged in outrageous statements and acts in an effort to kind of bring the world's attention, to get the world back into a dialogue on terms favorable to North Korea. So we can't rule all of that out, and I think the danger here is again less war than accident.
I want to take a moment here and introduce our other guest who has finally been able to join us. He's joining us from Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, and his name is Dr. James Acton. He's a senior associate in the Nuclear Policy Program there and specializes in deterrence, disarmament, and non-proliferation issues. Welcome, Dr. Acton. Thank you for joining us.
Good to be here, Sarah.
So we just started having this conversation about the posture that North Korea is taking this time. You're an expert in disarmament. Looking at North Korea's military situation right now, do you think it would even want to risk actually starting something with South Korea, knowing that it'll be supported by U.S. military might?
Well, I think Ambassador Hubbard had it absolutely right. I think there's very little evidence that what North Korea wants right now is full-scale war. I mean, if that was what they wanted, presumably they would have mobilized their forces, which they haven't done. What I am, however, very worried about at the moment is the possibility of accident or miscalculation. Every day that tensions are as high as they are at the moment, there's the possibility that accident, maybe an incident at sea, sparks off a militarized crisis. There's also the possibility that Kim Jong-un, who is a very young and inexperienced leader, might do what his father did in 2010 and commit a small-scale provocation against South Korea. Maybe he'll sink a ship, blow up an aeroplane, something like that. Now, he may do so believing that he will get away with it, believing that South Korea won't respond. South Korea, particularly their defense minister, has been absolutely adamant that if North Korea hits them, they're going to hit back. So what worries me is the possibility that through miscalculation or through accident, we get into an escalating conflict on the Korean peninsula.
And this time, as you mentioned, the South Korean government is also taking a slightly more aggressive stance to any possibility of any kind of attack. The president also said that, he gave the military the go-ahead to do anything regardless of political consequences. But I had a chance to talk to VOA's correspondent in Seoul, South Korea. He's the bureau chief over there, and I want to share that little soundbite with our viewers first, because we talked to him about what the situation is like on the ground in South Korea, particularly what's going on in people's minds on the street. So we'll take a look at that in just a moment. But basically what he said was that situation looks pretty bad in the media, yes, and everybody's worried about it. But for people walking around on the streets in South Korea, they don't really seem too scared. What do you make of that, Ambassador?
Well, I think the South Koreans have lived with this North Korean threat now for more than half a century. They have gotten used to it, and I think South Korea has very successfully gone about its own business, becoming one of the more successful economies and one of the more successful democracies in the world. So I think there's a lot of confidence in South Korea. And I think South Koreans do have confidence also in the health of our alliance, in the capacity of our deterrent structure. We have taken steps to reemphasize that during the course of the current military exercise going on. So I think the South Koreans are confident, courageous, and they will continue to go about their business.
I want to quickly go to Steve Herman, whom we spoke to earlier. He did say something quite similar to what Ambassador Hubbard said, but let's take a look.
It is business as usual here in Seoul, a city of more than 10 million. There is no sense of panic whatsoever. While this is being mentioned on the news, we don't have the sort of wall-to-wall coverage you would have on cable television in Pakistan, say if there was to be some big crisis going on with India. South Koreans are very used to this. They have lived with this bellicose rhetoric from North Korea for many years. They have lived with the fact that more than 1,000 pieces of long-range artillery are pointed at the capital. And compared to the devastating 3-year civil war that was fought on the Korean Peninsula in the early 1950s, this is really nothing, at least so far.
Now, it's good to hear that South Koreans are not panicking right now, but when you listen to the rhetoric in the United States from a government perspective as well, they're showing complete power, complete preparation. James, I want to quickly ask you this question. How much attention should U.S. pay in case this is a leader who's just trying to gain attention from the rest of the world? Is the U.S. kind of feeding into what he actually wants? Or what kind of posture would work better?
Well, I think the US has no choice but to pay attention to what's going on the Korean Peninsula at the moment. It's certainly true that your average South Korean in downtown Seoul is not terribly worried. I don't think the same can be said for the South Korean government, which I think is deeply concerned about what's going on at the moment, or the Japanese government. And Washington really has a profound and irresolvable dilemma in the way that it responds to what's going on at the moment. Take, for instance, its decision to fly nuclear-capable B-2 and B-52 bombers to South Korea to take part in the ongoing exercises. On the one hand, by doing that, Washington risks escalating the crisis. On the other hand, by not doing that, Washington also risks escalating the crisis by sending out messages that it's unprepared, that it's not willing to come to the defense of its allies. So this is not a crisis that Washington wanted. It's not a crisis the United States created. And in many ways, the US has been stuck between a rock and a hard place in the way it responds to this crisis. It's bound by treaty commitments to defend Japan and South Korea, but equally doesn't want to escalate the situation, doesn't want to see a conflict start by miscalculation or accident, but wants to demonstrate that it's prepared should North Korea start something. Now, that is a very fine and very difficult line to walk. And I think so far the US government has actually done pretty well in the way it's responded.
Ambassador Hubbard, what's your take on this? Because there are some groups that are criticizing U.S. action, and just as James Acton mentioned, that the presence of U.S. warplanes and U.S. military might in the region, in some people's opinion, is exacerbating the situation. What do you...
Well, I agree very much with what Jim said. It seems to me that the United States has gone about its necessary business in this crisis quietly and effectively. We have demonstrated that to the North Koreans that they can't intimidate us, that an attack would be futile. We have demonstrated to our allies, not only South Korea, but also Japan and others, that we will fulfill our commitments, that we have their backs. And I think we've also demonstrated to the Chinese that we're serious about this threat. And one of our basic hopes, of course, is that the Chinese will at some point step in and use the influence that we believe they have to moderate North Korean behavior.
But this has put China in a bit of a situation, in a bit of a conundrum as well. I mean, we're hoping, the U.S. is hoping that China would step in and rein in North Korea a little bit, but we recently saw that China supported the latest round of sanctions against North Korea.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And also the question that comes over here is, how much patience can Beijing practice with Pyongyang, particularly in this situation where it's almost at a point where China could be embarrassed by North Korea?
Yeah, I guess that is the critical question. How patient can China be? Given the developments we've seen in the region. They can't be happy with North Korean behavior. They can't be happy with what they've seen of the enhancement of U.S. presence in Northeast Asia. So at some point the world's patience runs out, and perhaps of all the countries in the world, China is the one that could have the most influence on North Korean behavior.
James, what do you expect China can do or should do, considering that it looks like it has a lot of influence, but recently the developments we have seen doesn't look like it has as much influence as we would have liked to see?
Well, I think China can and should do more. The really interesting question is, will it do more? You know, traditionally China has taken the attitude that North Korea was a valuable ally in the region. Beijing values stability in its immediate neighborhoods. It doesn't want to see a refugee crisis. It doesn't want to see US or South Korean troops approach it, be stationed in North Korea. I think what we're witnessing now is something of an internal debate within China. This has surfaced a little bit in the English language media, where different senior Chinese academics and officials have been publicly exchanging views on how much China should support North Korea. I don't claim to know how this debate is going to come out. I think it's going to be very interesting to watch it unfold. One interesting development has been that the new Chinese president, Xi Jinping, has appointed a foreign minister who is much more skeptical of North Korea than his predecessor had been. That said, I think it's much too premature to conclude that we're in the process of seeing a sea change in China in its attitude towards North Korea. Now, if China did decide, and I'm not predicting it will do, but if China did decide that it wanted to put a lot more pressure on North Korea, you know, a very large percentage of North Korea's food and energy flows through China. There's a lot that China could do. But I think there is the evidence at the moment that China will do a lot more, I think, is still fairly weak right now.
And then there is also, since China supported the latest round of sanctions, I've also read that there are hopes that maybe this would help US and China sort of come close to each other. This would be a point where you would see some cooperation between the two. Is this exactly the situation in which you would like to see China and the US bond a little bit, or is this probably not the best time or not the best scenario, at least?
Well, I think the hope has always been that you know, dealing with North Korea and the various challenges that North Korea presents would be an element of commonality for the U.S. and China, an element of common interest, and that we could work together. It hasn't thus far proven to be that, but let us hope again that China's patience with North Korea is beginning to run out. I think our patience is running out. South Korean patience is running out. I think it is time that the leading nations get together and figure out a way to get back onto a constructive path.
And today, North Korea also announced that after April 10th, it cannot guarantee the security of diplomatic missions in Pyongyang, and it asked that, you know, if people want to remove their diplomats, they can do that. And like you mentioned, you know, the world's patience is going to run out with them. What do you think would come out if the world's patience runs out? What could different countries do?
Well, I think we start with the Chinese. Start with the North Koreans, of course. I think they need to realize that it's time to ratchet down this rhetoric, to get back to a constructive path of dealing with the international community. I think we all agree, perhaps with the exception of North Korea, that nuclear weapons are undesirable on the Korean Peninsula. We need to get back together in a constructive process of trying to bring that about.
And even though hopefully nothing will happen and the countries will be able to, the surrounding countries will be able to contain it, we also had the opportunity to talk to some analysts and some people in Pakistan, because our target audience is Pakistani viewers, and we wanted to know what's their take on this issue. And as far as military analysts go, they have this approach that Pakistan will take a neutral stance if anything were to happen, because Pakistan is an ally with China and also with the US. We spoke to a military analyst. He's General retired Talat Masood. Let's take a look at what he had to say.
Pakistan will take a very neutral stance, but at the same time, Pakistan believes that you know, there is no reason for North Korea to be belligerent and to be aggressive.
I'm in a moment going to come to some Facebook feedback that we got, which is quite different from what he said. But I want to quickly bring in this issue. Do you think if any kind of a skirmish were to happen, that countries would have to take sides between the US and South Korea and, let's say, whatever direction China decides to take? James, if you can chime in on that, please.
Well, if there is an escalating crisis on the Korean Peninsula, and if North Korea does decide to use nuclear weapons first, which is extremely unlikely, but not inconceivable if the regime believes that its final days are coming, then I think the world would be united in outrage and dismay and disgust over what North Korea has done. And I think in practice, Pakistan would probably join that. There is actually a fascinating parallel between what's going on in Northeast Asia and what's going on in South Asia. One of the things we're worried about in Northeast Asia is that North Korea could be emboldened by its possession of nuclear weapons. That could encourage it to commit a provocation, such as the sinking of the Cheonan or the shelling of Yongpyong Island that Kim Jong-il did in 2010. That then leads South Korea to strike back, and that then leads you into escalation. That's actually very similar to a concern we have in South Asia. In South Asia, there's a fear that terrorist groups sponsored by the Pakistani state could hit India. India could respond by its so-called cold start doctrine that would involve a shallow thrust into Pakistan to try and hold territory, to force Pakistan to clamp down on the terrorist groups. Pakistan has said it would respond to that with the use of nuclear weapons. So in both of those regions, there's a deterrence continuum that starts at what's sometimes called the subconventional level, the lowest level of violence, and could lead all the way up to nuclear use. And that for me is a fascinating parallel between these two regions.
When we asked this question on Facebook, that, should people in Pakistan be concerned about this, and particularly is what's happening in the region, what could this lead to? Rahmat Khan says that there is no comparison between an ant and an elephant, but if an elephant keeps scaring a colony of ants, then they are forced to enter its trunk and drive it crazy. America should act carefully. And we have another comment from Syed Muzammal Hussain. He says the countries that are being threatened should change their policies for the better. Now, I must say that we did receive comments on Facebook where people also said that what North Korea is doing is not right and that it's all just hyperbole. And some people were worried about a third world war. But there are groups of people everywhere who think that, maybe America and South Korea should change their stance a little bit. America should soften its stance a little bit. It should cooperate a little bit more. It should not display this much military might. What do you say to that, Ambassador?
Well, I think the fundamental point is that America is not in any way threatening North Korea. It is the North Koreans who are threatening a nuclear attack on the United States or one of its facilities elsewhere, threatening provocations against the South Koreans. So we are defensive and are not threatening, and I think the North Koreans, I think the world needs to understand that.
But is this just North Korea's way of showing, its aggressive posture because it sees South Korea and the U.S. conducting military exercises in the region, and when you see planes flying over in front of your people, whom you have, over decades, fed this rhetoric of power and of existential threats. Yeah. How do you then, balance your foreign policy requirements and the kind of rhetoric you're feeding to your people?
Well, I think you need to get around this and point out also that the North Koreans are the ones who are violating United Nations Security Council resolutions that the Chinese and Russians and others have approved. But I think we're not the country that is hurling these threats. We are in an entirely defensive posture and supporting an ally which itself does not threaten North Korea.
James, I want to come to you. You are an expert on disarmament issues. How do you convince a country to give up its nuclear weapons when the government's modus operandi is that we have existential threats, we have enemies that are powerful, and we're going to show them what we're made of?
Well, countries that have given up their nuclear weapons in the past have done so when they haven't felt an external threat. And I think at the moment it's going to be very, very hard to go back to a disarmament process. The process that Ambassador Hubbard was involved in negotiating in 1994, I think, was an excellent process. And I think it's very unfortunate that the Bush administration essentially scrapped that framework, albeit because North Korea was cheating on it, but I think it was still very unfortunate that that framework was scrapped. What we've seen now over the last few years is that North Korea has revealed a very large uranium enrichment program. Now this is very significant because it's going to be much, much harder to disarm North Korea. Even if North Korea was willing to be disarmed, now it has this uranium enrichment program. My belief is that publicly the United States and South Korea and Japan should continue to say that our goal is the verifiable, irreversible disarmament of North Korea. I think that goal is looking increasingly hard and increasingly elusive. What I would like to see is behind-the-scenes talks, nothing in public, between the US and China with North Korea. to discuss risk reduction. But let me be very clear. To have those talks, North Korea has to be willing to talk. You know, the US has sent envoys to North Korea. They reached an agreement last February. North Korea broke that agreement, hasn't, engaged in the Obama administration's multiple offers to talk. So as much as I would like to see talks and negotiations right now, let's be very clear. It's, both parties in this have to agree to talk. And to date, North Korea hasn't been willing to do so.
Ambassador, you were part of the negotiations. Mm-hmm. Looking back at the events, do you think the international community has in any way failed?
I guess I wouldn't use that particular phrase, that the international community has failed. I do agree with what Jim said about the agreement that we reached in 1994, and I think the U.S. is in part at fault for scrapping that agreement. The North Koreans did not abide by it fully, but I think we perhaps made a mistake in totally abandoning that agreement in our effort to get at the problem of uranium enrichment. I don't think we can put that back together again, and I'm not confident that the North Koreans will be prepared at any early date to give up their nuclear weapons programs, but I think that has to be our goal. I agree that we should be doing what we can with China to try to create a framework that will make their abandonment of nuclear weapons a reality. And I think South Korea also needs to play a role in that. After all, it is the Korean Peninsula. We have a new, very, very strong South Korean president who has a mandate, I think, not only to defend South Korea, but also to try to work with North Korea to try to create conditions in which the nuclear problem and other issues with North Korea can be resolved.
I want to quickly bring in a soundbite from Yuna Lee. She is the journalist who, along with Laura Ling, was held captive by the North Korean authorities in 2009, and they were charged with illegal entry and activities against the state. And I had the chance to talk to her about just the situation of people in North Korea, because as our guest just mentioned, that aid is one of the things that can be used as a bargaining tool. Let's take a look at what Yuna Lee saw at the border when she entered North Korea.
My first impression about North Korea was the dwarfism caused by malnutrition among soldiers and their outdated technology, military technology. The soldiers I interacted, about 20 people I saw there, were very small. I'm only 5'2", and they were no bigger than me and very, very small size. And also they were wearing military boots, which was not the thick leather boots which South Korean soldiers would wear, but it was canvas green thin fabric boots that they were wearing. Also, they were using rotary phone. It seemed like they were having a hard time to connect or communicate with somewhere, either Pyongyang or their upper level.
All right, so this gives you, a little bit of picture of what people in North Korea are living like. We have just about a minute and a half left. What I want to ask both of you is there any chance to reach the people of North Korea? Because there is also a merchant class that's developing over there, and there might be some possibility of talking to people and circumventing the government. Ambassador, I'll start with you if you can quickly.
Well, North Korea is a very closed society, as Ms. Lim knows better than any of us. It is very hard to get out and talk to ordinary North Koreans, but in fact, more and more of information about the world is getting into North Korea. They are getting some access to the internet. They're getting some access to DVDs and the like. And I think increasingly the North Koreans are realizing what they're missing, what's going on in the world, and that will in fact help open the country up.
James, 30 seconds, if you can also give us your take on this.
I agree.
Does diplomacy have a chance?
I agree. Well, I think, diplomacy with the North Korean leadership is going to be very, very hard over the next few years. He's a very young and untested leader. I think the flow of information and the exchange of people between North Korea and the rest of the world can only be a good thing for the rest of the world and a bad thing for North Korea.
Thank you so much to both of our guests for joining us and giving us their insights. I thank both of them, and I invite all of you to join this discussion on our Facebook page. You can join that by logging on to Access Point Facebook page. It's Access Point with AT. Thank you so much for watching.